the chain of custody of digital evidence is so important to maintain carefully. And that's something that I think a lot of HR people, IT groups just don't quite understand. And I wish they did, because I've seen a lot of investigations go off the rails before they even really get started, just because there's chain of custody and preservation issues that occurred even before the digital forensics person was even called in to assist.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. It's rare to conduct an internal investigation of any complexity that doesn't involve emails, text messages, electronic files, access control records, telephones, video, or other digital information that may help us understand who did what when. And these records are often spread across the organization in dozens of different silos, making it difficult for an investigator to locate, much less preserve, digital evidence. Joining me today to discuss the use of electronic records in investigations is Noel Kersh. Noel is a principal with the public accounting and consulting firm Crowe LLP, where he leads the firm's national digital forensics practice. He has almost 20 years' experience in digital forensics, working on everything from criminal, civil, and family law cases to internal investigations for corporate clients. Noel will be presenting at the HR Southwest Conference in October about protecting sensitive data when employees leave the company. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Noel.
Oh, Mike, thank you very much for that intro. Appreciate it.
Well, let's start by what you do day in, day out. So what is digital forensics?
So digital forensics is the forensic science that deals with digital evidence. It's our job to extract the digital evidence, preserve it in a certain way that conforms to the rules of evidence in courts, so that the data that we're collecting is admissible in a court of law. So we take the data that we extract off a computer, device, whatever it is, cell phone, interpret the information on it, and then basically tell you what it's showing us, to offer our opinions as far as what it's showing a person did or didn't do, things like that.
And by digital, it's basically anything that's electronic or is captured electronically from a computer. And we think about computers and we think about emails and things like that, but I mentioned I've had cases where I needed digital access control records of who swiped their key fob in at a certain time. I've done public information requests to get actual records from a major tollway authority about when vehicles were actually, scanned going through the tollways, things like that. So it's any kind of just electronic information, right?
Correct. Yeah, it could be anything. And when I started in forensics, many years ago, the number of devices and the sources of data was tiny compared to what it is today in 2024. It's amazing. You listed a couple there, like the toll road data, things like even print logs on printers. There's electronic data exists in the cloud. Cloud computing is a big thing these days. It obviously didn't exist back in 2006 when I started in forensics. So the number of data sources has exploded as technology has just naturally evolved. So it's makes our lives more complicated, but also more exciting at the same time.
So we talked about all these different devices and places where information is recorded. How often, in your experience, does that digital information really make a difference in the investigation?
I would say I've conducted several thousand investigations of computers, like I said, examined several thousand devices, and had the opportunity to really locate information on computers that was the smoking gun. And it's a unique experience to, participate in the legal system in that way, where there's that nugget of truth that hadn't been found until you found it on a piece of digital evidence. And it's one of the things I love the most about what I do is participating in the legal system in this country. I can give you lots of examples of cases where I've worked where there's been a piece of evidence that was found that really kind of turned the whole case a different direction from what that was originally with the original way that it was going, or the original way that the fact finders and the courts thought it was headed. And so it's not every case, obviously, that we find the smoking gun, but there are many that that I've worked on where we found a piece of information that kind of turned everything on its head and really kind of shifted the focus of where the matter was heading and what the fact finders thought before we found that piece of evidence.
And of course, the hope is when you're on the corporate side doing an investigation into allegations of bad behavior or just concerns about the loss of proprietary or sensitive information, that, the hope is that you can get to that information before it turns into litigation. Can you talk a little bit about some of the experiences you've had in working on the corporate side? Do you feel like executives and leaders take the digital evidence preservation information, the requirement for that, seriously enough? Or is it, I wish I knew now what I knew then, or what you knew then, know what I know now kind of thing?
It's kind of all over the board, really. Some organizations have been down this road before and some haven't. And so a lot of times I go into a new engagement where I'm sort of gauging the experience level of the organization. Have they done this before? Are they familiar with what forensics does and how we can be used? Because we're an investigative tool that can be used to find the truth, and really kind of explaining. And there's an education that happens where I'm explaining to the HR department, this is what you can find with us. Here's what we can do. Obviously, there's budgetary concerns and everything, and we try to figure out what makes sense and how deep we want to dig and where we want to go and how we can get to where they want to in the investigation with the quickest and cheapest option. But there's always there's an education that takes place where we're trying to explain to them, this is what's going on. I wish I had $1 for every time I had a client call and say, we need an investigation on this. We suspect that this has happened. We had our IT group look at it before we send it to you. And those are very frustrating because when that happens, it tells me right off the bat, I know I'm dealing with a company that doesn't quite understand digital evidence. And so that's one of the first things I do is just explain the impact that little extra step that isn't necessary has on the investigation and our potential to find smoking guns. So
yeah, talk more about that. The well-meaning IT department that accessed somebody's computer and moved some files around, or the hiring manager or the frontline supervisor who thought they were being clever and being their own version of, Rockford Files and got in there and started doing their research. How does that screw up the digital evidence?
I like to use the analogy of, everybody's probably watched a version or two, or an episode or two of CSI. Think about it this way: if between the time that the crime occurred and the time that the CSI team showed up with their van with all their tools and all that kind of stuff, if between the time the crime occurred and them showing up, somebody went into the crime scene with a whole bunch of bleach and just started cleaning stuff up and moving things around and handling the victim, handling the evidence, handling the gun or whatever the case may be, and then brought in the CSI team after that and said, tell us what happened. They're going to have a really difficult time figuring out what happened because bleach has been used on the crime scene. Somebody else other than the suspect has handled the weapon that was used to commit the crime. All these kinds of things really alter the CSI team's ability to really get to the facts. And in a digital evidence realm, obviously we don't have fingerprints and weapons and things like that were used to commit the crime, but our evidence, our fingerprints and everything are dates and times that the operating system is recording for digital evidence. Those dates and times are what I use to answer the questions about what did this person do or not do, what occurred at the specific time and such. So yeah, them an IT team going in or a manager that just needs to copy a few files off the computer because they're critical to support their business. I get it. Not trying to be critical of that. I understand the business case. I've owned my own companies before, so I get it. But the impact that has is we have evidence that's been touched. There's been a team that's gone in and touched the evidence that we need to be as pristine as possible so that we can attribute everything that we're seeing on the computer as this is what the suspect did. It's the chain of custody of digital evidence is so important to maintain carefully. And that's something that I think a lot of HR people, IT groups just don't quite understand. And I wish they did, because I've seen a lot of investigations go off the rails before they even really get started, just because there's chain of custody and preservation issues that occurred even before the digital forensics person was even called in to assist.
So at the outset of an investigation, when I'm working with a corporate client, one of the first things I'm trying to figure out is what information may exist digitally, who has it, and what do we need to do to preserve it, so that, again, we're not screwing up that digital fingerprint on it, or making it look like we created a document or that we edited a document. Are those the right questions, or what other questions should we be asking at the beginning of an internal investigation?
There's a number of questions that you need to ask, not only yourself as a team, but also in my presentation I'm going to give at the HR conference in October is a list of exit interview questions that need to be asked of the person that's leaving the company. And it's a pretty healthy list, and happy to provide that to everybody that attends. It's a very useful tool, and the purpose of those exit interview questions is really it's twofold, really. It's to assess what does this person have, make them aware of what their responsibilities are to the company. And the last thing is just to get this person, basically under oath. I recommend that you have them do an affidavit that says, I don't have any information. If then a subsequent investigation determines that they lied in that statement, that helps your case whenever you're filing for a TRO and trying to get a court to do something. Right off the bat, you have a sworn statement from them that you can prove with evidence that is completely false. So those are the questions that you would ask the exiting employee. As far as questions you would want to ask yourself, it's just a whole bunch of a good digital forensics person will come in and they work with you to identify all the data sources. What are we trying to prove? There's a set of questions that I always ask my corporate clients. What are we trying to learn? What's the goals and objectives? What's the scope of this investigation? And then I will work with you. It's my job then to ask the questions about, do you have an email system? What is it? How do you store, do you have a cloud storage account? Do you have this? Do you have that? It's just for me to come in and kind of understand your technology environment to kind of help you work with you to identify what are those data sources so that we can make sure that those are all properly preserved and brought together so that we can use that as part of our investigation.
And I can only imagine how much easier your job would be if everybody's computer network was air-gapped from the rest of the world, and
yes.
We didn't have personal devices, we didn't have cloud computing and all of that. When it comes to, let's talk about personal devices first.
Mm-hmm.
How many people have their own personal iPhone or Android device, and they've got the company email on it? Maybe they've got access to cloud storage, things like that. They're downloading, sharing documents, working from their phones, working from coffee shops, on personal computers, whatever. How would you prefer companies deal with those kind of devices and doing work on personal, bring your own device kind of situations, so that whatever the situation is, whether it's protecting sensitive data or down the road, we've got an investigation we need to conduct and I need to be able to examine a device, how would you prefer companies set that up? What would make the evidence collection process the cleanest?
So the answer to your first question, does who has personal phones, like everybody. Everybody's got that. And, I've been doing this a long, long time. And as my own, I'm an employee as well. Just naturally, data travels from your work, your machine, to your personal stuff. It's just, you need to print a file at home. You need a file that you want a backup of a presentation that you're about to give, just to make sure I've got it backed up in different places. It's not meant to harm or anything at the time that data transfer occurred, but that information is in your possession. And so that happens, I would say, 90% of the time, if not more, and probably, substantially more than that. Everybody does. So because of that, it's one of the most difficult things to do is, assess how much does this person actually possess? Where is it? And then having them work with the company to get that information back. And, it's the exercise is to go and take a look and see, in their personal accounts and their personal devices and things like that, you need to take a look and see, do you actually have anything? And, 9 times out of 10, they have it. They didn't mean to have it. It just was there. But it's that one time when, they didn't have any information. And then like right before they left, 150,000 files they decided that they needed to have for some reason, not they weren't trying to steal data or anything like that. It's completely innocent, but which, lets you decide if that's legit or not.
Right.
So,
but yeah, everybody wants to save their own work product, their own history of what they've done while they're at
yes,
this company. And often there's information in there that you may not want floating around on a
right.
USB drive someplace.
Yeah, this is one of those things that I talk about in the presentation too, is, there's protocols that can be followed to examine those devices. And because they do contain your information, but they also contain the former employee's private information as well. So both of those things have to be respected. And so the protocols that I've got, I'm happy to provide those. They deal with both things, like respecting their privacy and confidential and even privileged information, but then also getting your company's information back from them. And so that's something that like I said, I talk about in the presentation. But one thing that companies can do about this is have policies in place whenever they join the company that tells them, when you leave, we are going to get our information back from you. We're allowing you to use your device, but that doesn't mean that, our data that gets on your device still belongs to us. It's not yours. And, we intend to get that back upon you departing the company. That's one thing from a policy perspective. From a technology perspective, there are systems that the IT group can use that when a person does use a personal device for work purposes, it registers with the system. And that way you have a log of every device that they've had access to your company's network. Or like if your cell phone is used to access company email, that system will have a log for that device. And so we'll have a nice list of these are the devices that you've communicated with our network. And so we want to take a look at those and get those back. And so those are a couple of things from a policy perspective, as well as from a technology perspective that companies can do to protect their information.
It seems like a few years ago, there was more than a few, there was a lot of conversation around personal devices and companies having virtual sandboxes that would be, if you want to use your phone, you access our network through this, none of our files can pass through this. And so we've got everything secure. But it doesn't seem that I've really heard much about that since post-COVID, certainly when everybody went remote. Are those still being used out there, or is that too much work for your average employee to fool with, and they just want the easier way of accessing the data?
I've seen the virtual sandbox being used in like the larger, more complex organizations that have the technology and know-how to first put that in place and then maintain it. So it requires some expertise, and obviously to be able to have a system like that in place and then to be able to support it. The mid-size to the smaller size companies don't have that technology advancement, or even are aware that that kind of technology solution even exists, and so it's not in place. So that's been what I've seen in my experience.
And so everybody's using personal devices. We've got all this information out there. It sounds like the employer really at the beginning of the employment period ought to have really, really clear expectations as for both the employee and the employer as to what we're going to store where, what our data practices are, who's responsible, and how we're going to hold you accountable to it. Not just when you leave, though, right? Every
Right.
employee has a obligation to to cooperate with an internal investigation, and that means if employee A says employee B sent them these text messages, and employee A is showing you these messages on their phone, HR may need to be able to walk over to employee B and say, we need to see your phone right now before you have a chance to do anything. What do those
Right.
policies generally look like? Do you see many employers have them in place before something goes wrong, or is that something they always implement after they've been burned?
It's more the former, unfortunately. It's more likely the scenario typically is they didn't think about that until they encounter that situation. So I always advise clients to be proactive in drafting their policies that can anticipate these types of scenarios. And so again, that's where a good expert, getting a relationship with a good forensics company really pays off in spades when the situation arises. So you're not scrambling and going, boy, I wish we had this. No, talk to people that have been there before and can tell you this is the policies that you need to have in place in order to help protect you when that scenario happens. And so, it's something that, like I said, that a good forensics company will do is help you draft those policies. I don't draft policies, but I can certainly tell you the scenarios that come up, and then what things need to be in place, from a policy perspective that you need in order to protect yourself, and also to what some of my other clients are doing that maybe they could possibly leverage for their company's policies. So yeah, it's typically, it's hard lessons learned, and it's difficult to watch, where it's like, yeah, this is something we need to get remedied ASAP. Now that you've encountered this situation, got nasty or whatever, this is what you need to do to avoid that in the future.
What about cloud computing then? Because it's amazing to me how many companies I come across who are using the Google Suite for all their stuff and seem to have very few guardrails around how and where it can be accessed, or just employees storing their own stuff on their own Google Cloud, for easy access. How often do you encounter issues with accessing information in the cloud or out there on a third party server altogether?
one of my uh, one of my case examples, I had a case where I worked where the client came to me and said, we suspect this person's taken data from them. In fact, we know that they've taken data from us because we've had clients that have shown us documents that they sent to them that were our data. So, how did this happen? Here's this computer. Take a look. Tell us what you see. Examine the computer, looked at the typical, transfer methods, USB, email, webmail, those types of things, even looked at cloud storage, and didn't really see anything that really raised the alarms, and certainly not to the degree. There was a lot of files this person had that the company became aware of that they were in possession of. And so it was sort of this, like, the computer didn't tell us anything, which is odd. So I started asking questions like, how do you store, where is this? You mentioned you had a Dropbox account when we started this. We need to collect that Dropbox account. I want to take a look at the logs and see what's going on there, because every Dropbox account or every cloud storage account will have logs of activity, including, IP addresses of the people that connected, dates and times they connected, what they download, did they upload, that kind of stuff. All that information is stored by these companies in pretty detailed log files. And so we took a look at the company Dropbox account and noticed an IP address that wasn't the company's, literally the Monday after this person left, accessing the Dropbox account. And so, started digging on that IP address. In turn, we were able to tie it to this person's new employer. And long story short, The issue was the company had a shared Dropbox account and they didn't think to change the password when that person left, that everybody used to access the Dropbox account. And so this former employee went to his new company Monday morning, went to Dropbox.com, entered in the credentials for the account, downloaded everything to his new work computer, and he was off to the races. And so that's an example of, cloud computing gone wrong. And again, it's one of those lessons learned. Now the company has, they changed their policies, access policies for that account. And also, if we do have a shared account, we have very strict policies that get executed when a person leaves, so that we're changing those passwords and things like that. But yeah, those are some hard lesson learned. I do see that quite a bit where there are access issues or things being accessed, downloaded from those accounts to personal computers is where I see that the most. Is a person uses a personal computer to access the company's Dropbox account before they leave the company and download stuff to it. That's the most common thing. The example I gave you is pretty uncommon, thankfully, but the most common thing I do see related to cloud storage accounts is just somebody using a personal computer or device to access the company's Dropbox account or cloud storage account and download data to their personal device. And it stays there unless we go and remediate it.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. A few weeks ago, I asked the attendees at an HR conference to raise their hand if they wouldn't wish to know that their candidate for a new CFO was convicted of embezzlement 8 years ago, or that an employee driving a forklift in their warehouse was convicted of negligent homicide after an auto accident 10 years ago. Unsurprisingly, not a single hand went up. Unfortunately, most background check companies only provide employers with criminal convictions in the past 7 years, ignoring even significant records that may be relevant to an employer. Of course, just because someone has an older record doesn't mean that they're unsafe in a given role. But if an employer doesn't know about the older criminal record, they can't make the determination as to whether it's relevant. 25 years ago, I founded Imperative to help risk-averse clients make well-informed decisions about the people they involve in their business. In the employment context, this means background check investigations with deeper research and more thorough reporting than most background check companies offer. You can learn more about how Imperative helps our clients protect their employees, customers, the public, and their own assets at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 168 and enter the keyword digital. That's DIGITAL. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Noel Kersh. I speak a lot about AI in the HR realm and the ethical issues around that and the practical issues. And one of the questions that's continually asked, and I'm hoping maybe you'll give me an answer that other than not yet, because that's what I keep saying, is have you seen litigation where somebody's queries to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever are requested from a from one of those companies to see, did they Google or did they ask ChatGPT, how do I kill my spouse? Those kind of things. I always say, if you're going to do that, go to the public library and use a dummy account and don't put it on.
Yeah.
But, but if somebody did ask, is this disease, if a manager asked ChatGPT, is this disease covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act? And then they fire this employee who's got this illness. Yeah. It's premeditated now, or they should have known. So have you seen those cases where those kind of queries have happened yet?
We have a case actually right now where there is a request out to the ChatGPT to produce that exact information.
Interesting.
It's pending, so I don't know the outcome of that yet, but that's the first one that I've been involved with where that request has been made. And this person was a really heavy user of ChatGPT, and so it provides a window into what was the person thinking, what were they doing, where was their mind leading up to their departure from the company. And so at the beginning we talked about additional data sources. That's a new data source that I think is just becoming a new source of information for investigations that will play a pivotal part in the future, really, I think, of all investigations eventually. But the days of old of everybody going to Google and doing Google searches is kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing that people are using AI for these days. And I have seen some unbelievable Google searches. I've seen people Google how to delete data off your work computer that isn't detectable by digital forensics investigators. I'm like, give me a break, man. Don't Google that, first of all, because that's one of the things we're going to take a look at. I've seen them, Google how to get out of an employment agreement. I've seen them look for, good employment attorneys. They were already planning their exit, planning litigation, like before they even left, and all kinds of stuff. So that is a useful data point in investigation because, again, it provides some insight into what is that person thinking and doing. And like I said, ChatGPT and the other AI tools are going to become similar to what we've been using web searches as a useful tool for determining, for helping us with our investigations.
And and I think a lot of HR folks don't realize, but there's always the risk that you're conducting your investigation. You think, okay, I've completed the investigation. I don't have to try to protect this electronic data. We've terminated the employee based on this information. I can move on. But every now and then, those terminations turn into litigation. Post-investigation, regardless of the outcome, because you could have a complainant who wasn't happy with the outcome or an accused who wasn't. What should an employer do post-investigation? How long should they continue to preserve an electronic record that's in state or whatever you would want to call it of what the information looked like at the time of the investigation?
This is actually, again, part of my presentation where my presentation really goes from the very beginning where it's called 2 weeks notice. So it goes from the point that you're given the 2 weeks notice by your employee all the way to basically the end of litigation and all those major milestones in there, like doing the investigation, and then step 2 is making a decision, like what do we do with the information that we gain from the investigation? Is it litigation? Do we try to reach out to them and take care of this outside of litigation, kind of in a try to avoid going to court if we can, see if they'll play ball with us and that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to give an answer, but it's going to be, I think there's a lot more to it that I can dive into. But if it does go to litigation, there are, obviously you need to preserve all the information that's involved with it. There's a duty to preserve that you have, and also your former employee has, that are required by law once it goes into a litigation situation. You have to notify all employees that are internal to not delete anything. If there's other people that are involved with the investigation, basically you need to put them on a litigation hold so that nothing happens to their information until this investigation is concluded or the litigation is concluded. And so, there's a number of steps that have to take place in order to not run afoul of the law. So if you do go into litigation, you don't want to be, guilty of spoliation or not preserving everything you should have, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of things that have to happen once it gets into the litigation realm. But the answer to one of your questions was, how long does this need to be preserved? I mean, it needs to be preserved. You need to get information or advice, I guess, from your counsel on how long to keep it. But typically it's at the conclusion of litigation, which, I mean, I've seen litigation go on for 10 years. In the worst case, most of the time, it's usually a 1 to 2 year type thing where it kind of winds itself through the court system and takes its own precious time these days to get everything resolved. But yeah, you need to hold on to that information for some period of time, and we just point you to counsel as far as to give you the best advice on those duties to the company.
Yeah, whenever I do an internal investigation for a client, any of that, I want them to always keep all the paper and all of that.
Yeah.
For really quite honestly, whatever the statute of limitations would be for somebody to bring a civil suit. And I tell them the same thing. You should really talk to an expert. I'm not your guy on this, but you should talk to somebody who can store this person's hard drive in the state it was. I mean, I understand you got to put this computer to somebody else, but you need at least a reliable, legally reliable version of what this hard drive looked like and at that time. And storage it's cheaper to store that electronic stuff than it is the paper. And so,
Absolutely.
but you got to keep track of remembering where you put it. But you may need that in 3 years. I mean, there's a lot of employment related laws have 5-7 year look back periods depending on what it is.
Yeah, and there's different. I mean, it's different rules, based off of where the litigation is filed, and so that's where the counsel can give you advice on what those rules are in those different areas of the country. But yeah, that's a service that we do for several of our clients, where we advise our clients that hey, just as a standard policy for anybody that has manager and above, if that works, or all of our salespeople, or whoever has access to the keys of the kingdom, like the keys of the kingdom, anybody that has access to that, just by policy, not even if there's any suspicions at all, everybody may leave and it may just be great. You may have no evidence that there may be even a problem. Just have an image made of it. I mean, it's not very expensive. We get computers just by automatically. It comes from a company. We need a preservation only. We preserve it, put it on a hard drive, and I ship it back to my client. They have an evidence room. They have a storage container that we help them get, and it goes in the storage container and it stays there. And then you have no idea how many times they have called us and said, something came up. What drive do we need to pull? So have you guys take a look at it. It's this drive, send it to us. We do an investigation, give them a report. Sure enough, the evidence shows something nefarious happened. And again, it's one of those situations where it was like, everybody seemed okay. Like it didn't have any hint of any issues. But yeah, if I could make one policy that every company has to follow, that would probably be it. It was just, just as a standard policy for when people leave, just make a copy of their drive, hold on to it for a couple of years. And then if nothing happens, you can delete it. But evidence storage and hard drives these days are so cheap, and boy, it can save you so much money in the long run. Just do that.
And you often don't even know if it's confidential or proprietary information. All of a sudden, it could be 18 months or 2 years before your competitor actually can leverage that, and it starts to become very obvious. And then you're like, oh, wait, Joe went to work for them about 2 years ago, and now they've got an almost identical product, and now we need to go back and look. And was Joe in cahoots with them? That's my favorite investigative term, cahoots, before we ever got, before he ever termed. But if you don't know, if you don't have that information, you can't know. But hey, we're out of time. Right. Thank you for joining me, Noel. I really appreciate it. It was interesting.
Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you.
And you can hear more from Noel at HR Southwest on October 13th through the 16th. You can also watch how the sausage is made as I record 2 podcasts live from the conference. And you can hear me and my friend and previous guest, Jim Zeta, discuss artificial intelligence during the legal exchange. You can review the entire HR Southwest 2024 agenda at hrsouthwest.com. And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Mary Ann Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.